I'm from Mississippi, and on the 4th of July, my son's best friend came with us to my family's get together, and their friend is Black, and he was the only Black person. The son's friend was obviously going to be protected with us, as are all of our Black friends, because I'm very aware of how racist people can be in Mississippi. And I even told my kids before we left for my family's 4th of July thing that if anyone said anything racist, that they knew that their mama was going to speak up, say something, because I don't care who you are. I don't care if you're my own family. I'm going to call you out on your racist BS, and that we would immediately leave, because I'm not going to tolerate that ever. So my kids know that about me, but I also want to make sure that they know that we have to speak out no matter who it is. I don't care if it's family. People come out and are saying, you need to warn your kids about being the only Black person amongst a group of white people, especially in certain places around here. Very much so. I agree with it. I'm always telling my kids, if you are with your friends who aren't white and you're around any certain area and someone comes out saying racist stuff, you have to be the one that speaks up. You have to intervene. When my kids were little and they would go play basketball at another guy's house, his neighbor always hung a Confederate flag. And I would tell my boys, if y'all are set on playing basketball there at your friends, please know if that man ever comes outside of that house, you have to be the one to speak to him. Do not let your Black friends try to say anything, because you never know what that man might do to them. So as a white parent who is very aware of the racism here and everywhere, in most places, unfortunately, it is my job to make sure I educate my children simply not on being not racist, but I want to teach them, and I do teach them, how to be anti-racist and how to use the privilege that they have as a white person around here to make sure that they're the ones speaking up and intervening to protect all their friends who aren't white, because they're going to be viewed differently than their Black friends. And so they have to do that. They have to step in. So if you're a white person and you get offended by people saying, don't let your Black children be the only Black person going somewhere with a white family, we should not be offended. We should be very aware of what they have to deal with all the time. And it doesn't matter if we're the exception to that rule. We should understand where they're coming from, and then also do our part to make sure we're educating our children on how to be better stewards of the privilege that they have, especially in these places, and to make sure that they're protecting their friends.
We loved him dearly. Nolan was like a brother to us, and I can say without a doubt.
And everybody gave their phones up.
Correct. Yep.
To be forensically evaluated by the FBI.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Lots of people have died there is a crazy thing to say when your best friend was one of those people.
Mind you, Trayston is friends with Katie. They are mutuals. I have confirmed this.
Good morning. Let me say the case that we have been dealing with now for the last several weeks around Nolan Wells is indicative of many cases around the country that have raised serious questions with racial overtones. Attorney Crump and I are going tomorrow, where I'm doing the eulogy for a young Black man in Madison, Wisconsin, homeless, and they say had a knife, and there's the tape of him being shot, 3 cops surrounding him, shot and killed, 4 shots. And these cases building up in a climate of an administration in Washington that we cannot feel will objectively investigate. There was a time that we could say if state authorities fail us, we can go to the Justice Department. Even under George Bush, we went to the Justice Department. We, at this point, have to hope that one, we could deal with civil courts, or secondly, that there's a balance of power with the Democrats taking the House in November, and maybe the Judiciary Committee under that can at least put a check and balance on cases that need to be investigated. But we are right now where we have 2 parents, lovely parents, I've gotten to know them, that really don't have an answer to a question. Is it a civil rights violation or not? And we do not know. How do you trust the words of people that say immediately there was no foul play when you haven't even investigated whether there was foul play? How do you trust people that come back from something that happened and never really give you a straight story of what happened, including you have the keys to the car? So when you have more questions than answers, you have to have people that will drive the answers out, and that's what we do. And that's why I've been involved, and that's why we stay involved. And it gets worse and worse and worse. The parent of one of the boys threatening to sue us for asking a question. Imagine that now. Some of y'all call us, what do you feel about the parents? One of the boys says he's going to sue you and Ben Crump. Sue us for what? For saying what happened? So we've gone back that far. And that is why we're going to stand with these parents, because usually, you know, I come from Brooklyn, New York. I was born and raised there. I don't come from the South. But my mother used to bring me down south to my grandmother in Dothan, Alabama. And Congresswoman, my grandmother told me, you see that pen over there? I said, yes. She said, that's a pen of hogs and pigs. I said, yes, ma'am. She said, always know something. If you take a brick and you throw it in that pile, the hog that hollers is the hog you hit. There's too much hollering going on in Mississippi that we haven't hit something. I can't figure out which one we hit, but we hit something. Because now they talking about lawsuits, they threatening a mother of a child, trying to get her job taken. You wouldn't be hollering if we wasn't hitting something. And we're going to stay on that, and we're going to stay on it all the way. In light of that, before attorney, and I call him the Attorney General of Black America, gives us the legal basis, and then we hear from the parents. Congresswoman who lived herself through dealing with the whole tragedy of her own son. That's how we met. On a plane. She was a flight attendant at the time. And she stopped me on the plane and said, Grandma, why ain't you dealing with my son's case? And we started a relationship. She ended up being elected right here in Georgia and reelected. They redrew her lines, and she was reelected anyhow. The lines couldn't reduce the favor of the people. Congresswoman Lucy McBath.
Good afternoon, everyone. First, I want to say thank you to Reverend Al Sharpton, and also thank you to Attorney Crump for being the armor bearers for this family, the Nolan's family. It's a really, really sad occasion that we're here again. I was just saying to my staff on the way in, it's like this brings back so many vivid memories for me and my own family, having lost Jordan to unnecessary gun violence in November 2012, Black Friday, simply because he was black and playing loud music in his car. And so here we are again today, here for the loss of another black young man in our community. And we find ourselves asking the same questions. How did it happen? Why did it happen? And this family stands here demanding answers. This family deserves answers. I myself sought the same justice for my son Jordan that they're seeking for theirs, and they deserve answers. And they deserve justice. Justice that should not be denied this family, or should ever be denied to any of our children or our lost loved ones. As a member of the Congressional Black Caucus, I'm the second vice chair of the Congressional Black Caucus. We are demanding a full federal investigation. Kash Patel, we're demanding a full federal investigation as to what has actually happened to Nolan Wells. We want to make sure that every stone is unturned, because his life matters. All of our children's and our families' lives matter. And we must fight back. We must stand up, and we must demand accountability for this family's loss. We cannot turn a blind eye to what continues to happen again and again and again. That's the reason why I ran for Congress, to make sure that we continue to put a face on what's happening to our families and our communities every single day. We must say Nolan's name. Amen. Say his name. Lift his name. And as the national Black journalist of this country, you have the ability to be able to lift this story and not let it die. We see over and over again these kinds of tragedies in our communities that continue to happen. And they make it to CNN. They make it to MSN Now. They make it to our local news for maybe 30 days, if that. Mm-hmm. And then the stories are gone. And the carnage is left with the families and the communities that have lost someone that they love. So I thank the National Black Journalists. Thank you for lifting this family story. Do not let it die. Continue to say his name. Continue to tell his story, because they deserve justice, and it matters. It mattered for me. It mattered for Trayvon. It mattered for Eric Brown. It matters for all of our loved ones that we have lost.
Here's one question, stated as plainly as it can be. Warren said Nolan was sitting on the boat with Katie when his friend started yelling for him to get on. And when Officer Tatum asked how many people actually heard that happen, Warren gave a specific number, 5. Not a few people, 5. Warren never names those 5 people individually. But think through what he actually described just moments earlier in that same answer. Nolan was sitting right there with Katie when the yelling started. If that's accurate, Katie wasn't somewhere else on the island. She was physically next to him for the exact moment Warren says 5 people heard his friend calling Nolan back to the boat. That's not something Warren claims outright. It's the logical conclusion of his own account, put together piece by piece. So here's the question that creates, and it doesn't go away no matter how you look at it. If Katie was sitting right there for the exact moment Warren describes, why has her own account, every version of it, everywhere it surfaced, never once confirmed that she actually saw that boat leave, or heard anyone calling for Nolan at all? A specific number, a witness who, by Warren's own description of where she was sitting, should have been right in the middle of it, and a gap between what his account implies she experienced and what she's actually said herself that nobody has closed yet. We're going to sit with that question tonight, and we're not going to rush past it. Here's a question we genuinely want your honest take on, not a rhetorical one. A grand jury hasn't even gotten this case yet, and these young men have already sat for interview after interview, on camera, repeatedly, with their attorneys right beside them. Some people watching this case have said plainly, no lawyer in his right mind would let a client keep talking publicly before a process like that even begins. Others say the opposite, that continuing to speak, with legal counsel present the whole time, is actually a sign there's nothing to fear from a grand jury at all. We're not going to tell you which one is right tonight. We actually want to know where you land, because both sides of that argument have real, smart people behind them. We're also holding 2 things back tonight that we think deserve their own full moment, instead of getting rushed through at the top. Later in this video, a trained behavioral analyst walks through Warren's entire interview in complete silence, tracking not what he says, but exactly when his own story shifts while he's saying it. 3 separate moments where he corrects himself in real time. And at the very end, we're going to tell you something about those phones that changes how you should be watching everything else in this video. Something that's already been checked, already been confirmed or ruled out, sitting in a file nobody's released yet. Stay with us for both of those. They're worth the wait. This is everything worth taking seriously tonight. Nothing else.
Hey, Tom Jones, reporter with WSB TV here in Atlanta. I keep hearing about this young lady that Nolan left with. Has anybody managed to find her, talk to her?
I think that what we're trying to carefully do is not impugn the investigation. So a lot of what may and may not have happened in terms of the dialogue with the lawyers and the family would not be prudent to testify on WSB Atlanta.
Hi, my name is Jahara Wilson with Blavity. You're calling on the Department of Justice to open an independent federal review of Nolan's death. What do you believe federal investigators could uncover that local and state authorities...
Let me clarify also, Congresswoman wanted to get some clarity.
Also, I do want to clarify that we've given them 7 days to respond.
This week, Ben Crump, Reverend Al Sharpton, Congresswoman Lucy McBath, and Nolan's own parents stood together and formally called for a federal investigation. And listening to it, one thing is impossible to ignore. This is a family that has done everything right and is still, 6 weeks later, standing in front of cameras, begging for the most basic thing any parent could ask for, to know how their child died. Here's what's actually confirmed, and it's worth sitting with the sheer scale of it. The Congressional Black Caucus sent a formal letter to the FBI requesting a full federal investigation and gave them 7 days to respond. That's not a symbolic gesture. That's Congress members with real oversight authority looking at this case and deciding it warrants federal attention. When people in positions of actual power start applying that kind of pressure, it's because the pressure that should have already been there from local authorities hasn't materialized. Think about what Christine and Elmore have actually had to live through for 6 weeks straight. A sheriff's office that told the public there was no reason to suspect foul play before a single autopsy had even been completed. A state report that's been finished since the end of July and still sits sealed in a drawer. 2 separate medical examinations, one the family paid for out of their own pocket because they didn't trust they'd ever be told the truth otherwise. And both come back with the same word, undetermined. Not an answer, just confirmation that nobody, including the people whose job it is to know, can tell this mother how her son died. And in the middle of all of that, this family has been attacked. Christine's own job came under threat. A parent of one of the boys is reportedly threatening to sue Crump and Sharpton for asking a question. Think about how absurd that actually is. A grieving mother is fighting to find out what happened to her child, and someone's response to that fight is legal intimidation. Crump said it plainly, and he's right. You wouldn't be hollering that loud if nothing had actually been hit. This family has never once demanded a predetermined outcome. Listen to what they've actually said, over and over, in their own words. We're not trying to reach a conclusion. We just want to know what happened. That's not an unreasonable ask. That's not special treatment, as Crump put it directly. It's the same investigation any family would want for their own child, applied even-handedly instead of rushed through with an early, premature statement that closed the door before the evidence had even been gathered. Elmore said something in that press conference that should stop anyone in their tracks. They're just asking the questions any parent would ask. And if someone has a problem with that, that's a problem they need to sit with themselves. He's right. There is nothing radical, nothing political, nothing unreasonable about a father wanting to know how his 18-year-old son ended up dead in the water off a barrier island 2 days after everyone he went out there with came home. Next Wednesday, would have been Nolan's 19th birthday. Christine said it herself. The realization is sinking in harder as that date gets closer, that he's not physically here anymore. Every other parent still gets to hug their child, still gets to call them, still gets to celebrate their life with them. This family doesn't have that anymore, and they haven't had a single real answer about why. That's what this entire federal investigation request actually is. Not politics, not a media campaign. A mother and father who buried their son and are still, 6 weeks later, being told to wait, to be patient, to trust a process that told the world no foul play before it had done a single piece of real work to earn saying that. They deserve better than that. Every family does. Whatever this federal review does or doesn't turn up, this much is already true. This family asked for exactly the same investigation anyone would want for their own child, and 6 weeks later, they're still waiting on it.
So let's break down some of the stuff that I heard in this interview. Let's start with Warren's first phone call, because y'all will remember that Warren said that he was over at Ava's house for that 4th of July party when they all started realizing that Nolan was missing, and he called Miss Christine at 11 o'clock.
One of the first things I told Miss Christine Wells in the first phone call that ever occurred with anything to do with Nolan Wells being gone, because I was the first person to call Miss Christine about anything. First phone call, anything to do with Nolan Wells, was me making a phone call to Christine Wells. And one of the first things I said to her, with multiple witnesses here, pull up the phone call if you want. She said, oh, well, Nolan's location is with y'all at, where the house we were at. And I was like, well, no, he left his phone with us. I told her this.
And yesterday, the same time that this interview came out, Christine Wells said this.
360 says that he's on land, and he was like, well, no, I mean, when we have his phone.
So both versions of the story say that Warren didn't tell her about the phone until after she confronted him with the 360. Now, Warren tells Miss Christine that he knows somebody in the Coast Guard and that he's going to call them, which is very fucking different than calling the Coast Guard, which absolutely explains why the Coast Guard came out and said at first that they had not received a call from the kids that night. The Coast Guard's initial statement said they weren't informed until 12:30. Then the Coast Guard later changed their story and said, oh wait, actually we did. And it seems to me that that first call was most likely an off-the-record to a friend kind of deal, which means these people freaked out and didn't call the Coast Guard until after all these people showed up at Jax's house. Which would explain why in the course of this interview it went from Warren called the Coast Guard to we did. Now, when the subject turns to how the family got the phone back from these boys, you'll notice that there was a couple slip-ups.
Warren, you weren't at the house, and so you weren't there when they came to get the phone and all that. So
now remember, Warren just said that he wasn't at the house when the phone was got. And then Morgan talks about getting a phone call from one of the people in Christine Wells' group.
And how did they get the phone back?
So I got a call from a kid we went to high school with. He called me just asking me questions. He saw people posting on Snapchat, like the picture that was circulating.
Except this picture wasn't posted until July 5th. So how could this picture have been circulating on Snapchat that night? But let's continue.
And he called and he was asking questions. He was like, where's Nolan? When's the last time y'all seen him? And then he was like, so where are y'all at? And I told him, I said, we're at Jax's house. And then Warren got on the phone, and I don't know.
So they come to my house, right? And they kind of hold on before we get there. Was it confrontational or was it just trying to find? It was confrontational already.
Wouldn't y'all agree?
Yeah.
He was 110%. He was very confrontational.
And when did this was this on the night of the 4th or the next day?
This was the night when this was before they came and got the phone.
So this is the night of the 4th, yes.
You guys are missing a part of the story. How did you get from Ava's house to Jax's house? Because Miss Christine is watching you guys on the Life 360. So suddenly she's seeing the phone leave one location and go to another. Of course I would be upset. And now all of a sudden Warren is there when the phone stuff starts happening? He's listening to the phone call? Now I need y'all to remember that Warren also said that the phone was in his truck on the first conversation, as we have from this report. Meaning if we were to believe Warren that he was not there when everybody showed up looking for the phone at some time in between 11 and 1 a.m., so then that would mean after they heard this angry phone call, Warren gets the phone out of his vehicle and puts it in Jack's house and then leaves.
There's probably like 10, 15 people in my house I don't even know. And they're all up in our faces, going crazy, asking where Nolan is, and we don't know. And finally they get into Wyatt's face, and they're like, "Where's your boat? Where's the boat at?"
Demanding his address.
Demanding his address and stuff like that. And he finally ends up giving it to him. We give them the phone. They have the phone at this point. Then they get the address to his house. Then they go to his house. And they're searching all over his boat, what I heard and stuff like that. Well, anyways, I don't really know much about that, but they come back to my house at around 1 o'clock in the morning.
We called law enforcement. I was with Wyatt at the time after we left Jackson's house that night. I was with Wyatt, and one person we were with saw that their location was headed towards Wyatt's house. And so Wyatt got on the phone with 911 and was like, "Hey, these people are on the way to my house, or already at my house. My mom and my dad are there alone, and they know nothing about this." But Wyatt's mom actually, when they were looking at the boat, they were actually walking from the boat, and she came out and started talking to them.
Okay, so let me get this straight. Wyatt, Morgan, and Jax were all together. Warren was gone for some reason at this point. 10 to 15 people just barge into your house. Don't know why your grandparents weren't around. That might explain some things, huh? Guess y'all had the house all to your fucking self that weekend. But then they ask Wyatt for his address so that they can go look at the boat. Wyatt gives them the address. They start heading over there. Wyatt and Morgan get into a car and leave Jax's house. Somebody else that you were with that we aren't hearing about is tracking someone else's phone. I don't know if it was somebody who was with the group that they had access to, or if they were tracking Nolan's phone and they saw it was heading to Wyatt's house. And even though Wyatt gave them the address, and instead of calling his parents, he calls 911 and tells them, "My parents don't know anything about that's going on. Can you send police over there?" Now, mind you, it was about half an hour after being on the phone with Warren that Christine was able to actually call and report him missing. But she was having to go back and forth and go down to all these different agencies because nobody would fucking help her. And frankly, I want to know why all of this confrontation was left out of the fucking report. Like, if this family had to be removed from 2 different properties by the police, why is there no record of that? And in fact, it wasn't until after these confrontations that MDMR and Ocean Springs Police apparently had their little conversations about who was going to be taking over the case. Because remember, the Jackson County Sheriff Lieutenant told them that deputies had spoken with several friends that had traveled to the island on the vessel with Nolan, and that when they were left, he was in the company of an unknown female. So now, even though Warren had supposedly called the Coast Guard, all these family members are telling the police that the kid is missing. These are the people that last saw them. They're all like, "We last saw him on the island." Still, the deputies said that they did not have reason to believe that there was any water-related exigencies or emergencies.
Forget the theories for a minute. Let's do what an actual investigator would do. Walk through one single night, minute by minute, and hold every single claim up against every other claim until we find out exactly where this story stops matching itself. Here's the actual discipline behind this kind of work, because it's worth explaining before we get into it. A real investigator doesn't start by asking who's lying. That question comes far too early, and it poisons everything that follows. The actual first question is narrower and more useful. Does this specific, stated detail match the independently verifiable record? A timestamp, a call log, a piece of footage, another person's own account of the same moment, or doesn't it? We're going to apply exactly that standard, piece by piece, to a single night that, the deeper you go, stops holding together the way it's supposed to. Start with the phone call that started everything. Warren says he called Christine around 11 that night, and that in that very first call, he told her directly that Nolan had left his phone with them. Christine's own account, given separately, says something different, that Warren didn't mention having the phone at all, until after she'd already told him her son's Life 360 was showing the device somewhere on land, not with him. Two versions of the exact same phone call. And here's the part worth sitting with. Both versions, told by two different people who were on two different ends of that same call, agree on the same underlying sequence. The phone detail came out after the Life 360 confrontation, not before it. That's not us choosing a side. That's both accounts, independently, landing on the same order of events, even though the framing around it differs. Think about what that agreement actually means for a moment, because it's easy to skip past. When two people who disagree about almost everything else in a story still land on the exact same sequence for one specific detail, that's usually the part of the story you can actually trust. Warren wants you to believe he was up front from the start. Christine's own account says otherwise. But strip away the framing each of them wants you to walk away with, and the bare mechanical sequence, Life 360 confrontation first, phone admission second, survives in both tellings. That's the detail worth building the rest of this timeline around, because it's the one piece nobody's actually disputing, even while they're disputing everything wrapped around it. Now here's where it gets genuinely tangled, the phone's actual physical location that night. In one account, Warren describes the phone as being in his truck. In the account of how it actually got handed over, the phone ends up at Jax's house, where a crowd of people came looking for it. But Warren also says, elsewhere, that he wasn't even at the house when that handover happened. Walk through what that actually requires to be true at the same time. If the phone was in Warren's truck, and Warren wasn't at Jax's house when people arrived demanding it, somebody had to move that phone from Warren's vehicle into Jax's house before Warren left, meaning Warren had to have been there at some point that night, handling the phone, before disappearing from the scene entirely by the time the confrontation actually happened. That's not impossible. People move around during a chaotic night, but it's also not the clean, simple story being told. It's a sequence with a gap in it that nobody's actually walked through out loud, step by step, on the record. A detective doesn't let a gap like that sit unexamined just because each individual piece sounds plausible on its own. The phone was in my truck is plausible. I wasn't there when it got handed over is plausible. Put together, they require a specific, unstated action. Someone physically moving that device from one location to another, at some point that night, that nobody has actually described happening. That's the kind of missing middle a real interview would stop and ask about directly. Okay, so walk me through exactly how the phone got from your truck to Jax's house if you weren't there for the handover. As far as we can tell, nobody's ever actually asked that question out loud. Then there's what actually happened at that house, because by every account given, it wasn't small. 10 to 15 people, described as showing up and going 110% confrontational, banging, demanding, pressing Wyatt specifically for his boat's address. That's not a quiet, tense conversation on a porch. That's a real, chaotic scene, serious enough that it eventually required law enforcement to physically remove people from not one, but two separate properties that same night. Here's the detective's question, and it's the sharpest one in this entire night. Where is any of that in the official record? If police genuinely had to be called out to remove a crowd from two different homes in one night, that's the kind of event that generates its own paper trail. A call log, a dispatch record, an officer's own notes. If that confrontation is real, and by every account given it clearly was, its complete absence from the documented record is worth a real, direct explanation. Either it's sitting somewhere that hasn't been made public yet, or a genuinely significant, physically real event from that night simply isn't reflected in the official account of how this case unfolded. Neither of those is a small gap. It's worth being precise about how significant this specific gap actually is, because it's easy to let it blend into everything else. This isn't a disputed interpretation of an ambiguous moment. This is a physically real event. A crowd, a confrontation, a police response, either happening or not happening, either documented or not documented. If it happened the way every account describes it, and there's no official record of it anywhere, that's not a small oversight in a busy night's paperwork. That's a specific, real event that the official record of this case is currently missing entirely. There's a smaller detail tucked inside that same chaotic scene worth naming plainly, because it's the kind of thing that's easy to skip past. By every account, the grandparents whose house this was, where the group had been staying that entire weekend, were nowhere around during any of this. Not during the party, not during the confrontation, not when 10 to 15 people were reportedly in that house at once. That's not evidence of anything on its own. Grandparents go out of town, grandparents stay elsewhere. There are 100 ordinary explanations. But an empty house, used as a home base for an entire holiday weekend by a group of teenagers, with the actual owners absent the whole time, is exactly the kind of detail worth a simple, direct explanation rather than silence. Now follow where this crowd actually went next, because this is where a second layer of tracking enters the story that's never been fully explained. According to this account, once the group demanding the phone got Wyatt's address, some of them started heading toward his house, and somebody in Warren's group knew that, in real time, because they were tracking a phone, not necessarily Nolan's. Possibly someone else's, someone whose device access has never been clearly explained. That's a real, specific claim. Someone had the ability to watch, in real time, exactly where this second group was heading, using a phone that wasn't described as Nolan's at all. Whose phone was actually being tracked, and how did that access exist in the first place? That's never been answered directly, and it's a completely fair, checkable question, independent of anything else in this timeline. And once that tracked group was confirmed to be heading toward Wyatt's house, Wyatt's own response is worth noticing too. He didn't call his own parents, who were home, to warn them. He called 911, specifically, according to his own account, because his parents didn't know anything about what was going on. That's a real, specific choice, reaching an outside agency before reaching the two people actually inside that house. There's a reasonable explanation available. Police can arrive and de-escalate a genuinely volatile situation faster and more safely than a warning phone call to two unprepared parents could. But it's still a specific, notable choice, made in a moment of real urgency, and it's worth naming as part of this same pattern. Information routed around the most direct, obvious channel, again. Now here's where all of this actually lands, and it's the most important thread in this entire night. While this entire chaotic sequence was unfolding, the confrontation, the tracked phone, the 911 call, the search of Wyatt's boat, Jackson County Sheriff's deputies were separately being told by multiple family members and friends that Nolan was missing. These weren't second-hand rumors. These were people who'd actually been on the island that day, telling deputies directly, "We last saw him there." And despite that, the deputies' own documented position that night was that they had no reason to believe there was any water-related emergency at all. Hold those two things next to each other. A chaotic, multi-property confrontation happening in real time, involving a missing 18-year-old's own friends and family, urgent enough to require police intervention twice, and Simultaneously, the official law enforcement position being that nothing here yet warranted treating this as a genuine water emergency. That's the actual gap this entire night boils down to. Not one contradiction, a whole night's worth of them, each one small enough to explain away on its own, stacking up into a sequence where almost nothing, the phone's location, the timing of who called what, the absence of official documentation, the pace of the department's own response, quite matches the version being told. It's worth asking, plainly, how a department reaches no reason to suspect a water emergency, while simultaneously fielding reports from multiple separate people that the same 18-year-old was last seen on an island and hadn't been heard from in hours. Those two things existing at the same time, in the same department, on the same night, is itself a real institutional question, separate from anything the friend group did or didn't do. If deputies genuinely had that much direct, converging information that night, the initial no reason for concern posture deserves its own explanation, on its own terms. None of this, on its own, proves anyone did anything to Nolan. People panic. People move phones around without thinking. Crowds show up uninvited, and things get chaotic, without anyone intending harm. But a detective's job isn't to explain away every one of these gaps individually and call the night resolved. It's to notice that an entire night, not one detail, an entire sequence of hours, keeps producing exactly this same shape. A version told confidently that doesn't quite survive being checked against another account, a timestamp, or an official record. Every one of these threads has an answer sitting somewhere that isn't anyone's memory. A 911 dispatch log, a Coast Guard call record, an officer's own notes from that house. Nobody needs to guess what happened that night. Somebody just needs to actually go get the records that already exist and lay this whole sequence out, start to finish, the way we just did. If you were the one holding this case file, which single hour of that night would you want the actual dispatch logs for first?
Called Miss Christine, and then they somehow ended up at Jax's grandparents' house. That's where they all stayed that weekend, and so that's why Nolan's keys were over there. They had to have been at the grandparents' house, who mysteriously never showed up during any of these confrontations. Somehow the phone had gone from the party that they were all at to Jax's place, and then Warren left after a phone call to Morgan. According to them, 10 to 15 people showed up and just walked into Jax's house and demanded the phone. Wyatt gave the address in which the boat was at. They all start migrating over there. Then Morgan and Wyatt and another friend are tracking their 360s and seeing that they're going over to Wyatt's house. Then they call 911 to tell them that the police are on the way to his house. Then they're searching the boat, and then they come back to Jax's house around 1 o'clock in the morning, according to him. Mind you, that's when they explain to the police about their friend being missing. And so then the report says at 1:38 in the morning, the Jackson County Sheriff's Office say that they spoke to several of the friends that were on the vessel with Nolan, saying that he was in the company of an unknown female. But Morgan, Jax, and Warren all claimed that they did not travel to the island on the same boat as Nolan. So who did they talk to? Because it sounds to me like they had told the police that they were on the same boat as him. Keeping in mind that this is what Warren told Miss Christine.
Named Katie. And so then it turned into, Katie is also missing. No one can find her. And the explanation of no one knows this Katie, like we've never met her.
And Tristan said this.
I was talking on my other buddy's phone, talking to Warren. He was dialing Coast Guard because he hung up the phone and was like, hey, this is them, bye, and hung up the phone. And that was the last time I talked to him.
Mind you, Tristan is friends with Katie.
The math is not mathing here. The lawyers, the two cocks, were on Nancy's show, right? And she asked them, did they know Katie?
Nolan wasn't with them anymore. They start asking themselves, okay, well, where's Nolan? They start texting everyone that they knew. Hey, have you seen Nolan? Do you know where Nolan is? Did he make it back home? All before they called Christine Wells that night, they start asking everybody. And so eventually they end up getting, through mutual friends, whoever, Katie's number. And so I believe it was maybe either Snapchat or text message. They got in communication with Katie. And Katie says, I don't know. We thought he was leaving with y'all. Well, I don't believe that's the case, obviously, because he did not leave with our boys. We don't know what happened.
Right, this doesn't make sense. Like, they didn't know Katie, so how did they get her number, right? And he says that, oh, they frantically were calling everybody, and then they got a hold of Katie's number, right? But then why would Christine Walmsley say this?
So this is 11:07. That's per my cell phone records. So I answered the phone. He's like, "Hey, Miss Christine, have you seen or talked to Nolan?" I said, "No. Why? He should be with you guys." And he said, "Oh, no, well, you know, when we went to the island, there was a girl named Katie that he met, and he had decided to stay behind." I said, "What?"
Now, don't you think that's odd that Warren called her and asked if she had seen her son when he was last seen with you? And then why would you tell his mom that, oh, well, he was last seen with this Katie girl? Why wouldn't he say, and we talked to Katie and she is not with him? Why would they not mention that? That's what's odd. The lawyer is saying they had talked to Katie before they called Nolan's mom, but why wouldn't you give Nolan's mom that information and just say he left with a girl named Katie? And why wouldn't you say you had already talked to Katie to confirm he wasn't with her?
We've already laid out, earlier in this video, why Christine's own time-stamped account of that 11:07 call doesn't match what the attorney later described about the group already having reached Katie before that call ever happened. A mother with a timestamp isn't the same thing as a mother with a feeling, and that gap has never actually closed. But there's something else sitting in Warren's own words, across every single interview he's given, that deserves its own full attention. Because once you actually start counting it, it's everywhere, and it's never once broken. Listen to how Warren refers to his own friend group, over and over, across this entire case. My buddies, my friends, some of my other buddies, every single time. And now listen to exactly where Nolan fits into those sentences. It's never our friend Nolan. It's never Nolan and I and the rest of our group. It's always structured the same specific way. Nolan named separately, and then my buddies, as if Nolan is being placed alongside the group rather than inside it. Here's one exact example, worth playing back slowly. I hung out with Nolan probably like 3 days a week. I mean, seriously, at least some days my friends want to hang out every single day, and Nolan was always there. Listen to the structure of that sentence one more time. My friends want to hang out, and Nolan was there. Not we wanted to hang out, not our group. My friends, and then separately, Nolan. We want to be careful and precise about what this actually is, because it would be easy to overstate it. This is not proof of anything. Word choice patterns like this are genuinely, legitimately studied in behavioral and linguistic analysis. They're called distancing language, and they show up constantly in completely innocent contexts. People describe friend groups this way all the time without meaning anything by it. Someone can be a real, close friend and still get referred to slightly differently in casual speech than the people you've known since childhood, simply because of how memory and familiarity shape the words we reach for without thinking. But here's why it's still worth naming directly instead of ignoring it. This isn't one sentence. It's a pattern, repeated consistently across multiple separate interviews, months apart, never once slipping into our friend or we. A single instance of this phrasing would mean nothing. A pattern that holds this consistently, this many times, in someone describing a friendship he's also called a brotherhood, is exactly the kind of small, repeated linguistic signal that a trained analyst would flag as worth a direct follow-up question, Not an accusation, a question. Something as simple as, when you talk about your friends, why does Nolan's name never actually become part of that my or our? Is that just how you naturally talk, or is there something underneath that pattern worth understanding? Nobody's asked him that question directly yet, and until someone does, this pattern just sits there, playing the exact same way every single time he talks about the young man he keeps calling a brother, and never once actually calls one of his own.
You remember the independent autopsy for Nolan Wells, and there were body parts that were missing, and they were still waiting for that independent autopsy to be completed? According to the legal team representing Nolan Wells' family, the DA actually said that they would give the independent pathologist, Dr. Mitchell, the opportunity to have those body parts to complete his autopsy. And as of right now, August 15th, they haven't done so. Take a look at the legal document that was shared. Same legal document from A.R. Smith. This is page 2 from the video from earlier. I want you guys to pay attention to this little section right here. Regarding Dr. Mitchell, we appreciate that you will make available Nolan's body parts that were not previously sent to Dr. Mitchell. As reflected in your July 29th correspondence, your office previously stated that Dr. Mitchell would have the opportunity to examine Nolan's complete body in advance of any grand jury testimony. At this time, Dr. Mitchell requests that you provide 3 available dates in which he can examine the body parts that he was not able to access prior. We are prepared to move forward promptly and thoroughly. This confirms that DA Mickelrath on July 29th did in fact tell Nolan Wells' family and legal team that they will have the opportunity to examine those body parts of Nolan Wells that was originally held because they had to send to an additional lab for further testing. The state of Mississippi completed their autopsy, we already know that, but they have not given those body parts to Dr. Mitchell yet, even though they agreed that they would. Why?
We've held 2 things back this entire video, and it's finally time for both of them. Start with the autopsy, because there's a real, dated, written promise sitting behind this that deserves your full attention. Everyone remembers the retained tissue, the neck, the throat structures, the body parts the state's own examiner held back from Dr. Mitchell during the independent autopsy. What hasn't gotten enough attention is what happened after. According to a legal document from Nolan's family's legal team, the district attorney's own office, in writing, dated July 29th, told them directly Dr. Mitchell would have the opportunity to examine Nolan's complete body, including the previously withheld parts, before any grand jury testimony took place. That's not a vague promise. That's a specific, written commitment from the DA's own office, with a stated purpose and a clear window attached to it. The family's legal team followed up formally, in writing, requesting 3 available dates for that exam to actually happen, and stated plainly that they were ready to move forward promptly. Here's the actual controversy, and it's worth saying with the same directness the source material used. As of August 15th, more than 2 weeks after that written commitment, it still hadn't happened. The state completed its own autopsy. Everyone agrees on that. But the specific body parts, the DA's own office agreed, in writing, to make available to the family's independent pathologist still hadn't reached him. Why? That's not a rhetorical question tonight. A written promise from a district attorney's office is not the same as an informal, off-the-record assurance. It's a documented commitment with an actual date attached that the same office hasn't followed through on more than 2 weeks later. There are reasonable, boring, bureaucratic explanations available. Coordinating a transfer of retained tissue between institutions isn't necessarily instant. Chain of custody protocols take real time. Scheduling around a grand jury process adds its own delay. Those are legitimate possibilities, and we're not going to pretend they aren't. But we agreed to this in writing and haven't done it yet, 3 weeks later, is exactly the kind of gap that deserves a direct, on-record explanation from the DA's office itself. Not silence, and not the family having to send a follow-up letter just to ask where the promised access actually is. This is exactly the same pattern we've walked through all video, a real, hard uncertainty at the center of this case, undetermined, and every single delay in actually resolving it falling on the family's side to chase down, follow up on, and put in writing themselves, while the institutions holding the actual answers take their time. If Dr. Mitchell finally gets that access, and it confirms what the state already found, that's real, valuable, independent confirmation. If it changes anything at all, that's even more reason it should have happened the moment it was promised, not weeks later under continued public pressure. Now, the second thing we've held back, the phones. We opened this entire video by telling you the FBI already has an answer to most of what people are still arguing about, sitting in a file nobody's released. Here's what that actually means, plainly. The friend group's own attorneys have confirmed, on the record, that their clients' phones were voluntarily handed over for a full forensic phone dump, not a casual glance, an actual reconstruction of location history, cell tower pings, deleted messages, time-stamped down to the minute, run with FBI involvement. That data has already been checked against every account these young men have given, in every interview, on every platform, across this entire case. That means every single contradiction we've walked through tonight, Warren's own corrections, the Coast Guard timing, the Snapchat timestamp that didn't line up, the phone's confusing physical location that night, already has a real answer sitting in that forensic report. Not a theory, not a behavioral read, an actual, time-stamped digital record of where every one of those phones actually was, and when. We don't have access to that report, neither does the public, but it's worth sitting with what that actually means for everything we've spent this video walking through. Every open question we've raised tonight is a question about what the public doesn't know yet, not a question the actual investigation hasn't already been able to answer for itself. The forensics exist. The written promise on the retained tissue exists. What's still missing, in both cases, isn't evidence. It's release. Between a written promise still unfulfilled and a set of already completed forensics still unreleased, this case doesn't actually need more theories right now. It needs the people already holding the real answers to follow through on what they've already agreed, in writing, to do.
It was just a big, I talked to Nolan, and, Nolan was drinking. Everybody was drinking, most of everybody. And, Nolan seemed completely fine every time I talked to him. We had just regular conversations. And, Nolan was making me laugh. I had a couple conversations with Nolan and Javon, Nolan and my buddy James, Nolan. And I could tell you, I talked to Nolan a couple times, but it wasn't like I was strictly sitting there talking to Nolan the whole day. There was hundreds of people I knew out there, so.
This is the part we've been building toward all video. A trained behavioral analyst, sociology and psychology background, certified in criminal interrogation and body language analysis, sat down with Warren's entire interview and did something almost nobody else covering this case has done. Applied real, disciplined methodology and was honest every single time about what a signal actually does and doesn't prove. Start with the baseline problem, because it matters for everything that follows. Warren isn't an expressive person. Steady voice, still eyebrows, calm posture, not closed off, not overly open, just consistently even. That makes this a genuinely harder read than most viral interviews get. But it also means something important. When he does deviate from that baseline, even slightly, it actually means something, because it's rare enough to stand out clearly against how he normally presents. The first real pattern worth naming is what the analyst calls getting ahead of criticism. Asked a completely open-ended question. Is there anything you want people to know? Warren's mind doesn't go to Nolan. It goes straight to the water depth, how quickly it drops off, unprompted. That's not random. Online criticism had specifically argued an athletic young man shouldn't have drowned in shallow water, and Warren, given a blank slate, went directly to rebutting that criticism before anyone even asked about it. He does this again with the multiple boats detail, repeating, almost verbatim, at both the start and end of the same story, that splitting up across boats and coming home separately is completely normal. Repeating the exact same information twice, with no new content added the second time, is the kind of pattern that tells you what's actually occupying someone's attention, not the story itself, but defending against a specific, anticipated criticism of it. Now the 3 corrections, in full detail, because we only summarized these earlier. The first happens off camera, so we only have the audio. Nolan was, pause. The last time I saw Nolan was 3 o'clock. The analyst's read here is careful and specific. This could easily be a lawyer's advice to stick strictly to known facts rather than speculate. But the correction itself is still worth a direct follow-up. Nobody's actually given it. What happened in the hour between seeing him at 3 and leaving at 4? Has Warren pieced anything together, talked to anyone, tried to figure out that gap? The correction signals it matters to him. That makes it worth understanding why. The second correction is visible, and it's more specific. Asked again, when he last saw Nolan, Warren answers the same way. 3 o'clock. But this time, we see his hand turn palm up and a slight side-to-side head shake as he says it. Here's the analyst's own explicit caution, and it's worth repeating word for word because it cuts against the version of this clip that went viral. There is no single gesture on this planet that universally means deception, and the head shake specifically is one of the most consistently misread gestures in all of body language. It shows up in disbelief, in disapproval, in simple emphasis. Yeah, no doubt about it, that's it. Paired with the palm-up gesture, which research connects to a lack of knowledge rather than deception. Essentially, I don't know what else to tell you. The far more likely reading is Warren expressing certainty about the limits of his own knowledge, not concealing something. What matters far more than the gesture is what he says immediately after it, that he personally spoke to someone who saw Nolan on the island at 6 o'clock. That's the actual substance. Find that person, get them in front of investigators, and this entire thread resolves itself either way. Now the Coast Guard segment, and this is where the clearest, most legitimate stress cluster in the entire interview actually shows up. Officer Tatum notices exactly the same tension we've flagged elsewhere in this case and asks it directly. If leaving someone behind on Horn Island is completely normal, why did not hearing from Nolan for a few hours turn into calling the Coast Guard? Warren's answer produces something the analyst is careful to call small, but real, a genuine deviation from his otherwise steady baseline, a lip lick, not typically part of how he presents, connected in the research both to stress drying out the mouth and to self-conscious grooming behavior. A jitter in his left leg that goes beyond his normal fidgeting, a slowdown in his speech, and a specific pattern the analyst calls fluff, unnecessary filler words stacked in front of an actual answer. Well, like I said, my friends and I have been on the water our whole lives. Before he ever actually answers why he specifically felt the need to call the Coast Guard that night. Here's the actual contradiction underneath that stress cluster, stated as precisely as the analyst states it. Ask a simple question. According to Warren's own account, is leaving someone behind at Horn Island dangerous or not? There's no clean answer, because his own words support both. He casually mentions knowing people who've died there, dropped in almost offhand, worth its own follow-up on its own, which suggests real, known danger. But if it's genuinely that dangerous, and leaving Nolan behind was casual and unremarkable in the moment, what actually shifted a few hours later into, we have to call the Coast Guard right now? Either the island is dangerous enough that leaving anyone behind should have been a real concern from the start, or it isn't dangerous enough to explain the urgency of that later call. Both can't be fully true at once, and that's precisely the tension his own body showed real stress responding to. The analyst is explicit, and we want to be equally explicit here, about what this cluster does and doesn't mean. Stress in response to a hard question is not evidence of murder. It's evidence that this specific question, why did the danger calculus shift so quickly, hit something Warren didn't have a clean, immediate answer for. That's worth a real follow-up question from someone with actual investigative authority. It is not, on its own, proof of anything more than that. There's a smaller, quieter moment worth including here too, because it's a genuinely clean example of the same distancing pattern we built out in the last part. When the topic shifts specifically to the cell phone, did anyone delete anything off Nolan's phone? Warren's body actually moves. A slight physical pull away, his head turning off angle, right as he answers. It's brief, and on its own it would mean very little. But layered on top of everything else in this same interview, it's one more small data point suggesting the phone specifically is a topic that produces a different physical response than most of the rest of the conversation. Now for real fairness, because this same interview also contains the strongest exculpatory leaning moment in the entire breakdown, and it deserves equal weight. Officer Tatum, using a classic interrogation technique, drops the direct, blunt question with almost no warning. Did you kill Nolan? Did you have anything to do with his death? Did you delete anything from his phone? Warren's answers are fast, clean, confident denials. No hedging, no over-explaining, none of the defensive over-talking he does elsewhere in this same interview when he's trying to get ahead of a criticism. That specific pattern, quick, uncomplicated denial without the elaborate justification he reaches for on almost every other topic, is genuinely notable, and the analyst treats it as real, meaningful signal, not something to dismiss. There's a second piece of fairness worth including here too, because it's one of the most careful, even-handed observations in this entire breakdown. When Warren names people who can corroborate his account, that Nolan was with Katie, that someone else saw him at 6, he never once hedges it. He doesn't add the kind of self-protective caveat a calculated liar typically builds in, something like, but she'd been drinking, so she might not remember, or, though I'm not totally sure that's accurate. He states it flatly, confidently, fully exposed to being directly contradicted if those people don't back him up. The analyst's own read, that's genuinely rare in people who are simply fabricating a story, because most liars leave themselves an escape hatch. Warren doesn't appear to be leaving one. But here's the other side of that same fairness, because the analyst holds both at once. For someone who's repeatedly described Nolan as a brother, there's a notable absence of anything resembling real grief-driven obsession, the kind of, what actually happened, let's piece it together, here's what doesn't add up, conversation that people who've genuinely lost someone close tend to have, replayed and re-argued among friends for weeks. Warren talks extensively about boats, about how Horn Island works, about who rides with whom, and comparatively little about actually trying to solve what happened to Nolan specifically. That absence doesn't prove anything either. But it's a real, honest observation, held next to the confident, caveat-free witness naming, without either one canceling the other out. Last thread, and it's genuinely the most educational part of this entire breakdown, the disputed audio, and why so many people are confident they're hearing something specific in it. The analyst is upfront about the limits of his own expertise here. He's not an audio forensics expert, and his personal impression of the recording, something that might sound like up, cover, effed up, carries no more weight than anyone else's. What he can actually speak to is the psychology, and it's worth understanding in full because it applies to every enhanced clip in this entire case, not just this one. There is real, replicated psychological research showing that when we listen to ambiguous or degraded audio while simultaneously reading a caption of what it supposedly says, our brain doesn't just interpret it that way afterward. It actually generates that audio in real time. Brain imaging studies on this show the same region responsible for genuinely processing spoken language activating, not just a memory or an assumption layered on top later. People report high confidence in what they heard, because as far as their own brain is concerned, they actually heard it. This is the exact same mechanism behind viral "what do you hear" audio illusions, the green needle and brainstorm effect, where the identical sound gets heard as two completely different words, depending purely on which word you're primed to expect, and the stadium chant videos, where an ambiguous crowd noise gets heard as completely different phrases, depending entirely on the caption running underneath it at that exact moment. It's not a flaw in any one person's listening, and it's not evidence that someone's trying to deceive themselves or anyone else. It's how human hearing works under genuine ambiguity, and it applies to literally everyone, regardless of intelligence, attentiveness, or how badly they want to hear the truth. Here's why that matters so much for this specific case, and it's worth being concrete about it rather than leaving it abstract. Multiple different people have released their own subtitled version of this same recording, each with real, sincere conviction about what it says, and each producing a meaningfully different transcript. That's not several independent confirmations converging on the same truth, the way real corroborating evidence should look. That's exactly the pattern the science predicts should happen when genuinely ambiguous audio gets paired with different people's confident captions. Different captions produce different, equally confident, equally sincere hearings of the exact same underlying sound. None of them are lying. All of them may be wrong. That's the actual, uncomfortable nature of degraded audio, and no amount of confidence from any single listener changes that underlying fact. There's also a genuinely important logical point buried in this section, worth pulling out on its own. People who believe the boat's background chatter already reflects something having happened to Nolan are, without realizing it, in direct conflict with a separate theory some observers have floated, that Nolan actually left the island with the group and something happened later, on the mainland, which would explain the missing day before his body was found in the same location he was supposedly last seen. Those two theories can't both be true. If the boat chatter already reflects a crisis in progress, Nolan never left with them at all. That's worth remembering the next time both theories get repeated in the same breath, as though they're compatible reinforcements of each other rather than contradictions of one another. Here's the honest, complete summary, in the analyst's own closing framing, and we think it's exactly right. None of this, not the corrections, not the stress cluster, not the distancing language, adds up to proof of anything. It adds up to a real, specific, investigable question. Where was Nolan when that boat actually left? Warren has named people who could confirm or contradict his account directly. That's where any real resolution to this case actually starts. Not in a comment section, not in body language analysis, not in disputed audio, but in whether the people Warren named actually back up what he said. It's worth being specific about what that actual follow-up would look like, because it's simpler than most of what's been argued about online. Investigators track down the specific person Warren says told him about the 6 o'clock sighting. That person either confirms it happened exactly as described, confirms something close but not identical, or says it never happened at all. Any one of those three outcomes tells you something real and immediate about the reliability of everything else in this account, not through inference, not through reading a facial expression, but through a direct, checkable statement from a named, locatable person. That's not a dramatic breakthrough. It's the unglamorous, procedural next step that actually determines whether this entire interview holds up or falls apart. And it's the one piece of this whole case that doesn't require anyone, not us, not a behavioral analyst, not an audio engineer, to guess at all.